In the early hours of April 12, 1861, the tranquil waters of Charleston Harbor bore witness to the opening salvo of the American Civil War. The battle that ensued at Fort Sumter would ignite a conflict that would tear a nation apart. The seeds of conflict were sown in the contentious presidential election of 1860. Abraham Lincoln's victory signaled a turning point for the United States. His stance against the expansion of slavery alarmed the southern states, leading South Carolina to secede from the Union on December 20, 1860. Over the next few months, 6 more states followed suit, forming the Confederate States of America. In Charleston, South Carolina, a Union fort remained a symbol of federal authority amidst a burgeoning Confederacy. Fort Sumter, situated on an island in Charleston Harbor, became the focal point of mounting tensions. Commanded by Major Robert Anderson, a Union loyalist, Fort Sumter was manned by a small garrison of 85 soldiers. Isolated and running low on supplies, Anderson's men were under constant pressure. Meanwhile, Confederate forces led by Brigadier General P.G.T. Beauregard encircled the fort, demanding its surrender. President Lincoln, determined to maintain federal property, ordered a relief expedition to resupply the fort. The Confederacy, viewing any attempt to reinforce the garrison as an act of aggression, prepared for a showdown. On April 10, 1861, an expedition to resupply Fort Sumter sailed from New York Harbor. On the same day, after considerable debate within Davis's cabinet, the Confederate president advised Beauregard to fire on any attempt to reprovision the fort. The next day, April 11th, emissaries from Beauregard delivered a message to Anderson, demanding the surrender of Fort Sumter. Anderson refused. Just after midnight on April 12th, Beauregard dispatched another negotiating party to the fort. This time, Anderson agreed to evacuate the facility by April 15th if his garrison did not receive supplies before then. Unwilling to accept Anderson's proviso regarding supplies, Beauregard's envoys ended negotiations just after 3 a.m. A final warning was dispatched at 3:20 a.m. by General Beauregard's 2 aides-de-camp.
Sir, by authority of Brigadier General Beauregard, commanding the provisional forces of the Confederate States, we have the honor to notify you that he will open the fire of his batteries on Fort Sumter in 1 hour from this time. We have the honor to be, very respectfully, your obedient servants, James Chestnut, Jr. and Stephen D. Lee.
The Charleston Press reported what transpired 1 hour later. Upon the signal, at 25 minutes past 4 o'clock a.m., the circle of batteries with which the grim fortress of Fort Sumter is beleaguered opened fire. The outline of this great volcanic crater was illuminated with a line of twinkling lights. The clustering shells illuminated the sky above it. The balls clattered thick as hail upon its sides. Our citizens, aroused to a forgetfulness of their fatigue through many weary hours, rushed again to the points of observation. And so, at the break of day, amidst the bursting of bombs and the roaring of ordnance, and before thousands of spectators, whose homes and liberties and lives were at stake, was enacted this first great scene in the opening drama of this most momentous military history, the Charleston Press. For 34 hours, a relentless bombardment rained down on the fort, with over 3,000 shells fired. Inside the fort, Major Anderson's men bravely withstood the barrage, despite limited ammunition and no means of reinforcement. A battery commander, whose name would be later linked to the invention of baseball, recorded the desperate situation inside the fort.
By 11 a.m., the conflagration was terrible and disastrous. 1/5 of the fort was on fire, and the wind drove the smoke in dense masses into the angle where we had all taken refuge. It seemed impossible to escape suffocation. Some lay down close to the ground with handkerchiefs over their mouths, and others posted themselves near the embrasures, where the smoke was somewhat lessened by the draft of air. Everyone suffered severely. I crawled out of one of these openings and sat on the outer edge, but Ripley made it lively for me there with his case shot, which spattered all around. Had not a slight change of wind taken place, the result might have been fatal to most of us. Captain Abner Doubleday, commanding Battery E, 1st United States Artillery.
On April 13th, with the fort ablaze and supplies nearly exhausted, Anderson made the difficult decision to surrender. Ironically, the only fatalities at Fort Sumter occurred just after the battle ended. During the surrender ceremony, a pile of cartridges ignited, killing one soldier, fatally wounding another, and injuring 4. The fall of Fort Sumter marked the beginning of a brutal and protracted war. The Confederates' victory electrified the South, while in the North, Lincoln's call for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion was met with overwhelming support. The battle lines were drawn. Fort Sumter became a symbol of the conflict that would engulf the nation for 4 long years, resulting in over 600,000 casualties and leaving a legacy of division and reconstruction. The echoes of that first cannon shot in Charleston Harbor have resonated for generations. The Confederates held Fort Sumter throughout most of the war until Major General William T. Sherman captured Charleston in February 1865. On April 14, 1865, Anderson, now a brevet major general, returned to Fort Sumter to raise the Stars and Stripes over the stronghold he had evacuated earlier, 4 years to the day. Tragically, later that night, as if putting a final bloody exclamation point on the entire brutal conflict, John Wilkes Booth shot and killed President Lincoln at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Today, Fort Sumter stands as a testament to the resilience and sacrifice of a nation divided and ultimately reunited. It reminds us of the cost of conflict and the enduring pursuit of a more perfect union.